Very happy that you're joining our Life Sciences and Health 010 Cafe today. It's an initiative that we've been running actually since the beginning of this year, really to bring together the life sciences and health ecosystem here in Rotterdam, and really to put entrepreneurs on stage to let them tell about the awesome things that they're working on and inspiring the community with their stories. My name is Laura van Beckum. I'm the Program and Partnership Manager at Venture Cafe in Rotterdam, where we aim to connect innovators to make things happen. And we do that here, but indeed also in many other countries, including Boston, where we have a visitor from today as well. Today I'll be moderating the session, posing questions to our speakers. I'll be doing that together with Sharon from Rotterdam Partners. Did you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. So sorry for my delay with my technology. I'm Sharon. I'm the business manager for Life Sciences and Health in Rotterdam, and I work for the local municipality, Gemeente Rotterdam. We're fully funded, and we're here to really help connect the ecosystem of life sciences and health companies in the city and in the Netherlands. I also work together with the Netherlands Foreign Investment Agency. And we really look to connect the international companies with the Dutch networks, with the healthcare providers, and with the right businesses to help make them successful. So nice to meet you all.
All right, thanks for that. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. We have Arosha Brouwer and Lucy Howie joining us today as part of Quan Wellbeing's team. Hi. Could you just do a very short word of introduction? Tell us about you and what you do at Quan Wellbeing.
Sure, I'll go first. Arosha, this is an Australian accent, Sri Lankan face. I've been living in the Netherlands for about 15 years now. I'm the CEO and co-founder with my partner in crime, Lucy, of Quan. My background is in strategy, and I've been looking at researching the well-being and performance of teams for about 10 years. Quan, we started our efforts actually with the birth of COVID, and we're really tackling the topic of, how do you place well-being at the heart of success? And we'll talk about the platform soon, but that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Arosha. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. My name's Lucy with a slightly different flavour of accent from New Zealand, living in the Netherlands as well. And there'll be a quiz at the end. No. So my background, I was the CEO of a tech startup in Amsterdam called Fuel Up, which is around tech scouting for innovation. And that was acquired. And then I was an executive at Zalando, which is a huge multi-billion euro company here, which was online fashion, where I was responsible for building new products around emerging technology like body scanning and that kind of, and algorithms around sizing. And so now it's great to talk about the two passions, which is wellbeing and innovation today. Yeah, and co-founder with Arosha, where I'm really responsible for the product and the technology side of things.
Right, so we have the dream team available today. Great. How long have you been working together? Did you know each other previously? How did your
we've known each other for about 3 years. Funnily enough, it was an org psych who specialised in psychometric assessments who met us separately and thought, oh, this would be a really great match. So we were actually introduced to each other, and it was kind of like we felt like we knew each other when we first met, but then it took us about 2 years before we started working together, I guess.
Okay. And with a great idea, I think.
Yes, and a trip to Sri Lanka in the middle. So
yeah, a bit of paradise, thrown in to make sure we really.
We all need that dose of paradise.
Absolutely.
Happy to hear. Yeah, and we already mentioned the word a couple of times, and without getting too philosophical maybe about this, but I'd love to talk about that word well-being. We had a bit of an intro talk, of course, and we also talked about it very briefly, but could you just explain to us, because this is really the cornerstone of your company, could you explain to us what well-being means to you? How do you define that?
Yeah, it's a good one. And actually the initial problem we were trying to solve was the fact that well-being is such a hot topic, and we're seeing burnouts on the rise, and organizations are trying to grapple it, and yet so little is actually known about what it actually is. Well-being in essence, there's more than 150 dimensions to it, and it's a relatively young science. At Quan, we've been working with psychologists and various types of coaches for a while, and our definition stems around 5 core dimensions: the body, the mind, sense of meaning, social connectedness, and self-fulfillment. And underneath those 5 kind of key dimensions, there's a number of sub-dimensions. So you can imagine, to body, there's sleep, there's nutrition, exercise; to mind, there's concentration, etc. And that's basically our definition of it. And we follow the school of psychology, which is really your subjective view of it, your feeling. But yeah, and that's perhaps why a lot of people don't know much about it, is because it's actually quite complicated and yet so important.
Right. And you have a great definition for this, and you selected a few pillars. So how did you come to that selection? Could you share a little bit about that? Because there's 150 dimensions to this, so why these?
Yeah. So I mean, we looked at looking at the science, of course, and we are evidence-based. So we've looked at what are commonly used, various models, etc. And right from the PERMA model, which most social psychologists will reference, through to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is what we would call a holistic view, which connects not only mind and body, but also a very important one, which is meaning. And especially with COVID, what you'll notice is a sense of purpose is becoming more and more important. And if you look at the kind of people that are entering the workforce, millennials, they're starting to care more and more about what organizations need to do. And then if you sort of overlay that with the school of consciousness, people are starting to think, hey, what do I do? Why do I exist? What do I want to spend my time doing? And so meaning becomes more and more important. So that's why we've taken a holistic view to it.
Yeah, good explanation. Yeah, and we also spoke about this previously, and the question that really triggered me, because obviously we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and are in the middle of the innovation ecosystem here in Rotterdam, is the question that you raised, like, why are some organizations better at innovation than others? And you mentioned that organizational design and being that great place to work for employees is something that's really important. So could you share a little bit more about the research that's kind of supporting that for all of the startups, scale-ups, entrepreneurs listening to this talk later?
Sure, I'll give a little bit into sort of the research I did, and then I'd love Lucy to talk about what she's experienced. I'd say about 5-6 years ago, my job was very much in digitization and change. And I started to ponder, why is it that some companies are better at innovation than others? And I realized that in order to better understand it, I had to be in amongst those that were actually really good at it. So I spent some time in Silicon Valley and found myself in the tech sector. And I was surprised by what I saw. And what I saw was that these guys were taking a similar view to organizational design and workspace structure as they were to products. And they were using data and psychology and experimentation to create really great ways of working. Over there's a lot of engineers, there's a lot of people that don't really care about the fluff. They just want to solve problems, and they want an environment which allows them to do that. So I started to see that connection between creating space, creating an environment for innovation to happen, and conscious design of that, and the success of innovation happening in those environments. And I came back here and I just looked around me and I looked at all the corporate structures that were saying they did all this stuff, but at the same time not really giving space, mental space, or the environment that's required for serendipity or creativity to fully occur. But I'll pass it over to Lucy.
Yeah, so I'll take it from a slightly different angle. In my previous startup, we worked with a lot of innovation teams of companies about how do you take innovative product to market, and especially partnerships with startups and scale-ups. And there was some quite clear themes of what made it successful. And talking back to what Arusha said about having wellbeing at the heart of success, if the measures are wrong, like all of the metrics are around tight financial metrics or performance, there's no room for failure and there's no room for experimentation, which goes to the culture, then it's not going to be successful. Then it needs to be room for failure, failing fast, room for experimentation and other metrics other than core success. Otherwise, yeah, it doesn't work. I think I saw a question pop up in the chat. Oh, the 5 elements.
Yeah, before we move on to the next topic, maybe it's nice to tackle this question. Thanks for posing it, Nicholas. So could you go a bit more in depth what you can do around the 5 elements on your digital platform?
And so to get to that, Nicholas, what we were essentially doing and the problem that we were trying to solve is in the workplace, we started to see a bit of a gap when COVID-19 happened, where, and I need to overlay the question with this, because similar to how we saw fantastic organizations creating new workplace practices and new ways of working based on experimentation and data, we found a lot of corporates just copying and pasting what others were doing, right? So, the pool tables, the unlimited holidays, all those sorts of things. When COVID-19 happened, and suddenly everybody was working remotely, suddenly wellbeing became a necessity, not a perk. Our team at that point really observed what was happening in the market. And what you saw was companies again grappling. We saw an influx of mental health sessions, yoga sessions, ergonomic chairs literally flying around the planet. And it was the companies responding to, oh, well-being's important. What are they doing? Let's do the same. And at that point, we were like, we still fundamentally believe you should use data and insights to inform what interventions to give to your people. So what our view is, we have the 5 dimensions, we have 28 sub-dimensions, and these are all symptoms. If you're not sleeping well, it's still a symptom. We go deeper to understand the causes. This is more than about 250 predictors. This explains why, if you're not sleeping well and you simply download the Calm app, but 2 stories later, sleep stories later, and you're not still sleeping, it's not sleep itself. It's perhaps the pressures that you have of financial insecurity. It's perhaps a bad relationship that you have at work. Those are the fundamental causes as to why the element of sleep is not so good right now. So all our platform tries to do is, on one hand, increase self-awareness of an individual, and so and then point them to ways to better do self-care, which is what the School of Clinical Psychology will say. But there's another very important element, and that's over the last 1.5 years, we've been working with like hundreds of teams around the world. The other element that's super important is the context in which you work, right? And so that's where clinical psychology and organizational psychology meets. So we will also start to look at the aggregated results to see what are the different things that you can introduce to your environment, or that a team can do different, so that a person can then thrive, right? So if an individual becomes more aware of, yeah, it is sleep, it is nutrition, and these are the reasons, then we look to build on that by sharing the aggregated results. So a team can see 50% of us are not sleeping well, 70% of us have anxiety. And this is where the platform tries to take the individual, the team, therefore giving everything to a single person so that they can improve both from self-care but also context. I hope that answers the question. And also the other really important thing is context in the questions. The 28 or so sub-dimensions we measure, we ask in the context of work versus home, because stress sometimes, and this is what we found with thousands or so user tests, is stress. You've got to think about the context. If you ask someone, are you stressed? They may give you an answer. If you ask someone, stress at home versus stress at work, then you get real critical insights, right? And that's kind of where we're headed towards. Get the data, get to the core.
Okay, great to hear your response there. And I hope that helps Nicholas as well a little bit with your, the question. And I know that you're going to explain a bit more about your product later in our conversation. I guess one of the questions I would also like to understand is, because you've done this research, you've been talking to a lot of people, you're talking to a lot of companies. One of the things that we really are looking for innovation in is preventative healthcare, finding better ways to stop things like anxiety, stop things like burnout and stress. In terms of companies, what is it they are going to need to be prepared for in the future? What kind of things will they expect will happen to their workforce, and how what is your research showing in terms of what those trends are?
Very interesting question. In fact, we saw some reports based in the Netherlands that was stating something like, within the course of a year, and this was like mid last year, 60% of professionals in the Netherlands would face burnout. We thought it was a ridiculous statistic, but now the reports are coming through, it's actually happening, and it's a global theme. And a recent report said that 70% of the participants in that particular survey, and it's a global one, had said that if another organisation provided better mental health support, that was a reason for them to leave, if the conditions weren't right within the organisation they work for. So the bottom story is that people are expecting more from organisations. Yeah, so not just in terms of perks, but we're seeing, and we work with psychologists. We know that the demands of the workforce have impact on a person's mental health and well-being. And when it comes to burnout, there is a strong link between the demands that come with just working versus a situation that person has. And the expectation is, and this is why organizations are now prioritizing employee well-being as part of ESG, is they have a role to play, right? It's not just a matter of sending someone to an EAP provider or a psychologist when they show signs of burning out. They actually need to change their ways of working so that people don't even burn out. And that means not giving them all access to a headspace and, great app. But if there's toxic culture and bad ways of working, that's what you've got to change. Not giving everybody access to a plethora of perks, which quite honestly has about 15 to 25% on average engagement rates.
Yeah, if I might build on that a little bit. So what we see now, which is a pretty standard, is EAP services, but that's the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. You're seeing an EAP, emergency employee assistance program, it's called, for those not familiar. Or it's a suite of perks like, we spoke to a CHRO of a big unicorn in Silicon Valley, and he said it's like an arms race where it's yoga classes, and we see these week off mental health weeks becoming popular, like Bumble and that kind of thing, but it's not actually uncovering what the need is and then fixing the problem, which is data driven. So that's what we're trying to solve. First, understanding the need, and then delivering interventions both to the individual and to the organization. Yeah.
And if I can build on that, that's why our mission is to place well-being at the heart of success. It sounds fluffy, but actually we're both ex-strategy consultants. What we're saying is, if you don't measure something, you can't manage it. If you don't prioritize employee well-being just as you do with your other KPIs, it's going to be fundamentally a cost in order to achieve that other KPI. That's why we say you've got to have data. That's why we say you've got to measure both at the same time. And that's also why we prefer to work with startups and scale-ups. We know that entrepreneurs face a lot of risk. We know that entrepreneurs take a lot of shortcuts, sometimes, when it comes to their own health and well-being. But they're fundamentally responsible for creating the context and the foundation for the organization. We want to work with these organizations to drive some social change in the way that they work. So as they become bigger and better, the way they work is really with the well-being at the heart.
Okay, great. And maybe just to incorporate then the question from Nicholas, which is a follow-up to looking at the 5 elements which you've talked about, is also a little bit, where else do you get that information? Is it solely from the surveys, or are you also using other ways of finding that out? And actually, how are you getting that data, and how are you getting that information from these companies? And I guess the second part of my question as well would be, do you have examples of companies that are doing this successfully today? Because, we're also looking for who's leading the way in this, right? It's still very new, and a lot of companies want to find the right way to do it, but it would be good to know if people are getting it right anywhere.
Maybe I can take the first one, and then I'll let you take the second one. So right now, we have a general wellbeing assessment to the employees where we measure across the 5 different dimensions. We also do what we say is a deep dive. So it uncovers, say, the 3 things that are scoring low. What would the employee like to work on? So we dive a bit deeper to understand where that is the what, the why, which is why, for example, Arusha used sleep. There's a lot of reasons why sleep could be an issue. Then we dive a bit deeper and to uncover, okay, it's conflict with leadership, or it's stress at home, or something like that. The results go to the individual, and they're aggregated, anonymized and aggregated to the company. So that's the insights part. The second part, which we're still building out, is measuring the effects. So the interventions that are delivered either by us, by the wellbeing ecosystem, by internal interventions from the company, was it effective in lifting this wellbeing? We call it the wellbeing index. Or not. So there's 2 kind of key parts for the data points of the measures. Does that answer your question, Nicholas? Yeah, kind of. All right.
But no physiological.
No.
So it's not like we're integrated with the Apple, how many steps and all that kind of stuff. Not yet. But yet. To be honest, we have been researching that, and there's some interesting studies about the psychological versus physiological markers of well-being, and in some cases, physiological markers tell you one way, but fundamentally what someone believes and perceives says a lot as well. And we just found that quite interesting. So that's why we want to go down that path first, and then see what physiological markers become interesting for us. And remember, we believe in consciousness, and there's a lot of things out there with nudges and apps and things that tell you, that it's trying to gamify well-being. We're trying to stay away from that. We're trying to make it more conscious. So there is a reason why we've picked this path.
Just out of curiosity, sorry, Lucy.
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks.
I'm taking over the moderator's job.
That's good. I like that. But just out of curiosity, is there also a difference between, for instance, a corporate or a startup in the way they should deal with this well-being, with the well-being of their employees, or is it more like a generalistic approach to how you should be doing this, regardless of the type of environment you're in?
I think everybody should. I mean, a good asset test is, your loved ones. Do you want them to work in an environment where it's going to be, conducive to their well-being and an overall state, or the other, right? Absolutely. In any situation, whether you're a husband or wife, a partner is a doctor, or they work in a local fruit shop, you want to make sure that they're not experiencing stress and have space, and that they're exactly. So fundamentally, we believe that this should be a social change. But having said that, we do know that there are early adopters, there are organizations that use the whole, we want to hire the best talent for marketing purposes, and there are organizations that are actually willing to change and do things because they believe in it. We're also, been researching the future of work for a long, long time. We're seeing an acceleration towards it. We believe in the future where people will have, join multiple causes, not organizations. They'll be able to pick and choose where the best places are to work. And they'll naturally know and gravitate towards organizations that allow for that. So, we're seeing a movement towards teal a few years out, but we have that in mind with what we're building.
Yeah, and to answer your question, Laura, is there a difference between startups and corporates and how they approach this? I think startups and scale-ups have a much more open mindset about this kind of thing. It's a bit harder with corporates as they're much bigger and slow to change, and frankly, some that we've spoken to, if you uncover the data, they have to do something about it. And a lot of them have openly said they're not resourced up already to do something with the problems, maybe, that they anticipate it will uncover, which is saying something in itself, I think, before they even start. So that's I think the mindset is quite different, which is why we're working with a lot of startups and scale-ups, because they seem to be a lot more open to this kind of mindset so far. But who knows? So hopefully it changes.
Those are the early adopters.
Yeah, and we've got a few large corporate organizations, but there's pockets, right, and teams. Typically close to innovation, where they do have top talent and they do want to create an environment where they can be creative. Those guys are definitely open to it.
Okay, and then maybe just going back to the question on examples of companies who are getting it right. Do you have any good examples where you say, from a company perspective, this is a company who've really thought about it and they've acted on the data, or they've just acted on the knowledge of this is something that is needed within their organization?
Yeah, so we've got a few organizations that we've got markers on. They're smaller, actually, where the co-founder is still in the mix. The organizations are around the 50 to 150 size. A lot of agencies where they prioritize people because their business is people. We find that they're giving a lot of bespoke interventions or offerings for people. And they're very flexible in the types of benefits that they offer. It's very personalized. And we're starting to see a move by some of the larger organizations towards that. And actually, I was happy to read Google announcing, I think a few weeks ago, around their move towards optionality and creating optionality for their teams and individuals. I think this is a really strong indication to the market. They're basically saying they also recognize the future of work. They also recognize the importance of networks and teams. Google's recognizing that their job is to create a lot of ingredients, and then they're allowing teams where the place where work is being done to pick and choose what is best for them. And that's bravo, because a lot of people look to Google. I've researched them a lot, spent some time talking to some of the chief people officers there. And I think that's a strong indication to the market about where you should go. Don't copy and paste, but rather think about what are the best options for the group that is my company.
And I think if I can just add something, we're really trying to lead best practice at Quan. So we aspire to be one of the companies that is signaled out as best practice around wellbeing. And how we've done that is, we have a team of 8, and for example, all of the contracts are completely flexible. And what kind of contract? Some includes childcare as part of the remuneration, for example, and flexible hours, and also our ways of working. And the way that we communicate, we make sure that that's flexible to the different types of people that need what. And of course, we regularly take the wellbeing assessments and incorporate into our weekly practice, really a lot around wellbeing. So we're trying to be one of those. We hope to be.
Yeah. And from, I mean, you know, we've also seen a lot in organizations, whether it be small or large, the impact of COVID and remote working, the lack of ability for people to network and connect and do their job in the regular, usual way, which has a big impact on well-being. Do you see that, you know, there's things that organizations right now should be putting as a priority to offer to their employees? As I don't think there's a quick fix to well-being, you know, there's more detail and that's why you're doing this analysis. But is there things that you would say this is really a priority for companies to think about right now after, you know, the pandemic and people coming back to work? What recommendations would you give based on your experience?
And the first point, what we'll say is every organization is unique, and therefore, you know, first understand where the needs are is always going to be our standard response to that. Having said that, what the data is showing us is mental health is actually important. We see it in terms of the trends in the reports, but the data through our platform is showing the same. And therefore, yeah, do look at, you know, consider stress, anxiousness, what the impact of uncertainty is doing on your workforce, and make it a conversation and assist your managers. Because if you've got remote teams, the responsibility is falling on your managers to create the context for work to happen. And a lot of them are not equipped, so empower them.
That's been one of our main focuses, and one of our key learnings is enabling the leaders, because they're the ones that now suddenly are expected to deal with the wellbeing challenges of the team. And some like, look, we're not psychologists, we're not counsellors, but with the data and being empowered, it's really good. Yeah.
Hey, can you tell us something about the companies that you work with? What kind of challenges do they see internally? Why do they approach you? And maybe you can also share a little bit of some of the results that you've been able to achieve when they started working with you.
Yeah, so these are typically CHROs or senior business leaders. That's what's happened. So with the larger companies, it's been business leaders of a specific unit, or CHROs of startups or scale-ups. So scale-up CHROs, and if it's a startup, it's usually the founder. And it's a recognition that COVID has impacted mental health, emotional well-being, and they're like, you know what, the engagement survey, the pulse check's not telling us much. And we want a little bit more insights is typically the question. They want to actually know what's going on. And number one, and then the number two is the perks or the interventions that they have is low engagement and they're not sure if it's working. So those are the two normal reasons why that comes in. What we've been doing over the last year and a half is that we've been giving the platform to teams of more than 6 to 15. They've been generating the insights, and then we've actually wrapped a team coaching session around it with a trained coach or psychologist to actually help the team go from insights into identifying interventions to improve their way of working. And we've been running pilots with about 6 global customers over the last year, and they've been increasingly expanding Quan to more and more teams. And the reason for that is the feedback has been that the platform provides a vocabulary or a framework for teams to start talking about wellbeing. There are clear insights for team lead, but also a team on what they can do to change the way of working. And individuals feel that a safe space has been created for them to address it. So, you know, within a 5 to 7 minute assessment to a 2-hour coaching session, so total commitment time, 2 hours 15, say, you've gone from here are the issues, here's the data, here are actions. So it's been well worth their investment of time, and they're seeing results, and that's basically the outcomes.